I'm Claire Dawson, 25, and when my name rose over the loudspeakers at graduation, the sound seemed to float past a row of empty chairs I'd saved with hope. The applause around me swelled for other families, then thinned as I crossed the stage without a single familiar face standing. The sun threw diamonds off 1,000 camera lenses, but none pointed my way. A photographer asked if I wanted a picture, and I said yes, because sometimes pretending is the only way to make it through. I smiled alone, cap tilted just so diploma tucked against my ribs like something fragile. The crowd spilled into the courtyard in waves of flowers and hugs, and I drifted to the edge where the noise couldn't quite reach. I told myself it was fine that I was used to it, that an empty seat can't break what's already been worn thin. I had no idea that the first knock on my door would come sooner than any congratulations. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from in the comments, and if you've ever had to stand on your own 2 feet when it mattered most. Tap that like and subscribe, so this story finds the next person who needs it. I grew up in a small ranch house south of Denver, the kind with creaky vents in winter and a patchy lawn that never seemed to take. We weren't poor exactly, just careful coupon folders, tucked in a kitchen drawer, hand-me-down coats stored in the hall closet, Saturday afternoons spent fixing whatever could be mended instead of replaced. My mother, Mary Ann, prized appearances, a straightened bedspread, polished shoes, a polite smile for neighbors. My father, Douglas, prized quiet bills paid on time, lights off by 10, no fuss if it could be avoided. They taught me to show up early to say thank you, to keep my worries from spilling into the room. It felt like integrity then, a house built on tidiness and restraint. When I was 15, I took my first job bussing tables at a diner off the highway, coming home with clothes that smelled like onions and coffee. I told myself I was helping, that every tip tucked into a jar on our counter made us steadier. Later, when I learned spreadsheets and statistics came easy, I pictured a clean escape scholarships, a dorm room, a desk under a library window, where the only sound was the thrum of fluorescent lights. And for a while that picture held. Campus life meant secondhand textbooks and long, quiet nights. My world was discount rice cookers and thrift store boots, 20-minute bus rides to a job that kept the lights on. On weekends, I'd visit neighborhoods where glass towers caught the sky, watch couples in pressed clothes step from warm cars, and feel the difference between their lives and mine extend like a bridge I wasn't sure I could cross. By the time I started my master's, I knew how to make it look effortless. Smile at presentations. Keep pace with group projects. Keep the worry out of my voice when the bursar's office sent another reminder. I rented a small walk-up in Capitol Hill with a narrow kitchen and a window that framed a finger of the Rockies. Downstairs, Mrs. Alvarez watered her plants at dawn and reminded me to eat real meals, not just cereal at midnight. When classmates celebrated, I often stayed behind, lingering in labs where the hum of servers felt steadier than conversation. The few times I texted home about small victories, a scholarship renewed, a paper accepted, the replies came late or not at all, and I learned to tell good news to the quiet instead. Still, I held on to the image of graduation the way a person holds a railing in the dark. I pictured my parents in the front, my mother dabbing at her eyes, my father's hand lifted just slightly in a proud wave. I pictured my sister Haley snapping photos and making jokes about my cap sitting crooked. I ironed my gown the night before and tucked the invitations into my bag as if I could deliver them to the seats myself. On the morning of the ceremony, Denver put on its brightest face, blue sky flags, stirring rows of chairs blinking white in the sun. I found my row, traced the seat numbers I'd circled on the map, and told myself to breathe. Then the procession began, one name after another, a tide of joy that didn't leave a space for mine. When it was over, the campus broke into clusters of color roses and balloons and arms thrown around shoulders. Tessa Lane, who sat 2 rows behind me in econometrics, ran up with a bouquet and squeezed me like we'd been neighbors since grade school. Her parents appeared with a camera and kind smiles, and I stepped back so I wouldn't be in the way. After they left, I found a brick wall in the shade, balanced my phone on my bag, and set a timer. The shutter clicked. The photo looked like proof cap gown, a good angle on the diploma if you didn't zoom in on the space beside me, where no one stood. Driving home, I rolled the window down and let the city drift by, the gold numbers on bank towers, the smell of coffee and bakery sugar pooling at intersections, laughter from patios as people lifted glasses to beginnings. I carried my gown upstairs carefully and hung it on the inside of the closet door. The apartment was still and clean the way I kept it when my mind was crowded. I straightened the frame that would hold my degree and listened to the building settle around me, pipes ticking like a faraway clock. On the counter, my phone buzzed once and went quiet, then buzzed again, brighter this time, the screen lighting the room with a strip of white. I reached for it and paused, the way you pause before opening a letter you already know by heart, and felt the first thin strand of something new pulling tight. The text on my phone glowed in the dim light of my apartment. 3 words stared back at me, like a headline I didn't ask for. Need $2,100. Then the rest followed, each word clipped and cold. Haley's Sweet 16, DJ photo booth venue already booked. Send it by Friday. No greeting, no question about graduation, not even a half-hearted congratulations. Just another transaction wrapped in family obligation. I sat at the kitchen table, my diploma still propped against the wall, the ink from my name catching the lamplight. It felt strange how quickly celebration could turn into a bill. I opened my banking app out of habit. $3,000 sat in the account savings scraped together from tutoring sessions and weekend data entry shifts. It wasn't much, but it was the first bit of security I'd ever had that didn't belong to anyone else. My thumb hovered over the transfer button. I could send it, make the noise stop before it started, and keep the peace like always. But something in me shifted. I typed in $1, added a single word. Congrats, and pressed send. Then I closed the app, leaned back in my chair, and let the quiet settle around me like a new kind of armor. A slow exhale left my chest as I looked toward the front door. The spare key my mother insisted on keeping suddenly felt heavier than the lock itself. Just in case something happens, she'd said when I moved in. I used to believe that meant safety. Now it felt like permission. I stood, grabbed my phone, and searched for a locksmith. The man who arrived an hour later spoke softly, his toolbox clinking as he knelt by the door. I watched the old lock come loose, each screw turning like the start of something I should have done years ago. When he handed me the new keys, the metal was still warm. "Keep the receipt," he said kindly. "Proof of your own peace of mind." I smiled and tucked it away. The apartment smelled faintly of lavender from the bouquet Tessa had given me at graduation. Outside, Denver's spring air moved through the curtains. For the first time, I noticed the difference between silence and loneliness. I poured tea, sat by the window, and told myself that this was how freedom began, not with a grand announcement, but with a changed lock and a quiet heart that refused to be borrowed anymore. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, soft and steady. I brewed coffee, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and replayed the previous night in my mind. Every motion had felt deliberate, the text, the lock, the decision not to answer her calls afterward. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was more like exhaustion catching up to me after years of pretending I wasn't tired. Around noon, a gentle knock came at the door. Mrs. Alvarez stood there with a folded envelope in her hand and concern in her eyes. "I saw someone changing your lock yesterday," she said. "Everything all right?" I nodded and handed her my copy of the lease, explaining that it was just a security update. She looked over the paper, then back at me. "You're the only one listed here," she said softly. "That means no one comes in unless you invite them. Not even family." Her words lingered long after she left, warm and firm like sunlight through glass. That evening, I sat at the table and opened my phone again. The missed calls from my mother lined the screen. I started a voice recording, remembering a law firm internship where I'd learned that in Colorado, one-party consent recordings were legal. I wasn't planning anything beyond self-protection. I dialed her number. She answered on the third ring, her voice tight. "So, you finally decided to call." I kept my tone calm. "Mom, I just wanted to make things clear." She let out a sharp laugh. "Clear. You send me $1, go silent, then change your locks." "What's wrong with you?" I breathed slowly. "Nothing's wrong. I just want to live independently. The apartment's in my name and I need my own space. Space? She repeated, disbelief rising. From your own family, we only kept a key in case something happened. I pressed my thumb against the table's edge. That's the point, Mom. Nothing's happened. I'm fine. I just want boundaries. She scoffed, her voice hardening. Ungrateful. We raised you, paid for your education, and this is how you repay us. Haley would never talk to me this way. You're right, I said quietly, because Haley was never taught to earn peace. There was a pause, then the faint sound of my father's sigh before his voice came on. Let me talk to her. The line shifted. Claire, what are you asking for exactly? 3 things, I said, steady now. I won't send or lend money anymore. No one enters my apartment without my permission. And from now on, every decision about my life belongs to me. Silence filled the line, heavy and measured. Then my mother's voice returned, softer but shaking. Are you cutting yourself off from us? I looked around my small apartment, the cup of cold coffee, the folded locksmith receipt, the glow of evening sliding through the blinds. No, I said finally. I'm just learning to protect what little peace I have left. The line went dead. I saved the recording and labeled it Boundaries May 17th. That night, I walked the block twice, the cool air clearing the last of my nerves. The city was alive with laughter spilling from bars and the hum of passing cars, yet everything inside me had gone still. Back home, I opened my notebook, the one I used for budgeting, and wrote a single line on the first blank page. Saying no doesn't make me cruel. I closed it and placed it beside the locksmith's receipt, a reminder that even small steps could count as victories. The following evening, while I worked on a freelance data project, a knock came at the door. 3 taps, firm and rhythmic. I checked the clock, 9:30 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. A man's voice followed, calm and professional. Denver Police Department, Ms. Dawson. We're here for a welfare check. My chest tightened. I looked through the peephole. 2 officers stood outside, one tall, with a kind expression, the other younger, holding a notepad. I opened the door. The tall officer introduced himself as Officer James Porter. Your mother, Mrs. Marianne Dawson, called in, he explained gently. Said you'd been acting erratically, changing your locks, not answering calls. She was worried you might harm yourself. I almost laughed but caught it before it escaped. Does this look like someone unstable, officer? I gestured around the tidy apartment. He smiled faintly, scanning the room. We just need to verify you're safe, that's all. I nodded and invited them in. The younger officer stayed near the doorway while Porter looked around. On the table sat my laptop, the warm lamp light, a framed diploma, and a mug of tea still steaming. He nodded approvingly. Looks like you're doing just fine, Ms. Dawson. He asked a few gentle questions. Did I live alone? Did I have work? Was there anything stressing me out? Just a graduation no one came to, I said quietly, and a family that doesn't know what silence means. Porter made a small note in his pad, then looked up. Would you like me to report that you're stable and working, no concerns of harm or distress? I nodded. That would help. Thank you. He reached for the doorknob, then paused. Your mother mentioned something else, he said carefully. Said you might be under financial strain. Opened a few new credit cards, missed payments. Should we be aware of that? I frowned. What credit cards? He read from his notes. 2 new accounts opened recently. Some high balances. The room went still. I haven't opened any new accounts, I said. Porter glanced up, his expression thoughtful. It could be nothing but check your credit report. Identity theft happens more often than people think, sometimes even within families. I stood there, my hand resting on the back of a chair, as the weight of his words sank in. Thank you, I managed. He nodded. We'll note that you're safe. If your mother calls again, we'll direct her through official channels. After they left, the apartment returned to silence. The only sound was the faint tick of the clock above the fridge. I stared at my phone, her text still sitting at the top of the thread. Need $2, $100 for Haley's Sweet 16. I opened my laptop, heart pounding, and typed in the credit bureau's website. The screen's blue light spilled across the table as I entered my information. What appeared next made my stomach twist. 2 credit cards in my name, both recent, both carrying thousands in charges. And below the billing address, clear as daylight, was my parents' home in Littleton. The cursor blinked in front of my eyes, a steady reminder that something I thought I'd secured had already been taken. I closed the laptop slowly, the metal cool under my palms. Outside, a breeze rattled the window pane. Somewhere in the distance, a car alarm chirped once, then stopped. I sat still, watching the glow fade from the screen, realizing the knock on the door hadn't been the end of the story, it was only the beginning. When the officers left, the apartment fell into a heavy quiet that pressed against the walls. My laptop still glowed faintly on the table, the credit report frozen on the screen. 2 new cards, both carrying balances in the thousands, both tied to my name and social security number. But the address, my parents' house in Littleton, flashed like a siren in blue text. I stared at it until my reflection blurred into the glass of the screen. Every breath felt too shallow to carry the air I needed. I opened a new tab and clicked the number listed under customer service. The automated voice came first, bright and indifferent. Then a woman picked up her tone, patient and professional. "Thank you for calling Capital One. This is Lauren Pierce. How can I help you today?" I gave her my name and explained slowly that I hadn't opened any new accounts. She asked for my social security number, birth date, and address for verification. When I finished, there was a pause, the faint sound of keys clicking. "All right, Ms. Dawson," she said, "give me just a moment to pull up your record." The silence that followed stretched long enough for me to hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Finally, she came back. "It looks like this account was opened last month at our Littleton branch. Application completed in person." My throat tightened. In person. She confirmed, then continued, "The signature on file matches the ID presented at the time. Would you like me to read the contact number associated with the account?" I nodded, though she couldn't see me. She read it out slowly. The numbers fell like a code. I already knew my mother's cell phone. "Could you tell me who verified the application?" I asked, my voice barely steady. One moment, she said, tapping her keyboard again. "Yes, it was confirmed by a Ms. Marianne Dawson, listed as co-applicant." My fingers went cold against the table. For a moment, I couldn't find words. "Ma'am," Lauren added gently, "I can flag this for fraud right away. You'll receive forms within 24 hours. Once you complete them, we'll start an investigation and freeze the accounts." I thanked her, writing everything down, the account numbers, the branch, the exact date. When the call ended, I sat there staring at the sheet of paper, the black ink trembling slightly under my hand. I opened another browser tab and checked Discover Bank. The same thing. Same week, same phone number, same address. There was no misunderstanding. My mother had used my identity to fund Haley's party. The DJ, the photo booth, the Cherry Creek venue, everything. I pushed the laptop shut and sat back, the chair creaking beneath me. The memory of every favor I'd done for them, every time I'd handed over an account number or signed a form I didn't fully read, clicked into place. I could still see myself at 17, sitting at the kitchen table while my mother said, "Give me your SSN, sweetheart. I'll fill out your FAFSA for you." I had trusted her because she was my mother, because it never occurred to me that trust could become a key she'd keep for herself. I opened the drawer beside me and pulled out an old envelope labeled Important Documents. Inside, folded between expired car insurance papers, was a list in my handwriting: bank logins, security questions, recovery emails. At the top, a line written years ago: "Keep safe with Mom." My stomach turned. I set the paper down, picked up my phone, and scrolled to the recording I'd saved from the night before. Boundaries, May 17th. Her voice filled the room, again, sharp, indignant, the sound of someone used to control. "We only kept a key in case something happened." I pressed pause and felt the realization settle heavy and cold. She'd kept all the keys, literal and otherwise. The next morning, I called Officer Porter. He answered quickly, his voice low and steady. "Ms. Dawson." I told him what I'd discovered, that I had proof my mother had used my identity. He didn't interrupt, just listened. When I finished, he said, First contact both banks and request immediate account freezes. Then file a report with the Federal Trade Commission. If you need a copy of last night's welfare check for your records, I can send it." I thanked him. He hesitated a moment before adding, "I've seen cases like this. It feels personal because it is. Just stay calm and document everything." His tone carried a kind of quiet empathy that made my throat tighten again. After hanging up, I printed the statements, the confirmation emails, and the screenshots of every charge Cherry Creek Events, Glam Studio, Denver DJ Agency. The printer hummed and spat out page after page until the stack lay warm beneath my hands. I slid the papers into a brown folder, labeling the front in black ink evidence. On the table beside it sat my framed diploma. For a long moment, I looked at the two side-by-side proof of everything I'd earned and proof of everything she'd stolen. Between them, I felt suspended, half proud and half undone. That evening, I decided to face them in person. I chose a diner in Highlands Ranch, far enough from their home to feel neutral ground. I arrived early and ordered iced tea, my hands wrapped around the cold glass. The brown folder lay on the table beside me, a quiet anchor. The air smelled of coffee and grilled onions. A waitress hummed along with the old country song playing over the speakers. When the door opened, I saw them, my mother leading sunglasses pushed into her hair. Though the sun had set, my father following close behind, eyes fixed on the floor. Haley trailed after them, dressed in a UCLA sweatshirt she'd been flaunting online for weeks. My mother spotted me and gave a thin smile. "You really made us drive all the way out here," she said. I motioned to the booth. "Sit." She didn't even glance at the menu when the waiter approached. "We're not eating," she said briskly. "We're just here to talk." I folded my hands on the table. "Good. Then let's talk." For a moment, no one spoke. The kitchen hissed with the sound of a skillet hitting oil. "I found 2 credit cards opened under my name," I began. "They were mailed to your address. The phone number, the signatures. They're yours." My mother blinked, her smile tightening. "Oh," that she said lightly, waving a hand. "I did that to help you build credit. You don't understand how important that is at your age." I stared at her. "You used them for Haley's birthday party. The DJ, the venue, the decorations, it's all on the statements." She sighed, glancing toward my father. "Douglas, say something. She's making it sound criminal." He cleared his throat, but said nothing. My mother leaned forward. "You're her big sister. It was one night. You have a job now. Don't make a scene over a little debt." I felt my pulse in my ears. At 16, I worked to pay for her Spanish lessons. At 18, I lost my college fund because you bought her a prom dress. And now at 25, you've stolen my identity for a party. When does it stop? Haley rolled her eyes. "Mom said you agreed. Besides, you're not broke. What's the big deal?" The words landed sharper than she realized. "The big deal," I said evenly, "is that you're learning it's fine to take from people who love you." My mother's hand smacked the table. "Don't lecture me, Claire. I've done everything for this family. If I hadn't taken charge, that party never would have happened. You'd have let your sister down again." I opened the folder and placed the printed statements on the table. "You didn't take charge. You committed fraud." The word hung in the air. My father rubbed a hand over his face. "Sweetheart," he murmured, "your mother went too far. But can't we handle this quietly? We're family." I shook my head. "Family doesn't open credit lines in your name and call the police pretending you're unstable." Haley muttered under her breath, "drama queen," and slid out of the booth, typing something on her phone. My mother glared at her but didn't stop her from leaving. "You'll regret this," she whispered. "If Haley's party is ruined, I'll never forgive you." I stood and gathered the folder. "You don't have to," I said. "I just need you to stop." I left the folder's copies on the table and walked out into the parking lot. The air smelled of rain, the asphalt slick and shining under the streetlights. As I unlocked my car, I glanced back through the window. My mother sat stiff and speechless, my father staring at the evidence like he didn't recognize his own name. Driving home, the city lights flickered across my windshield. My hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel, not from fear, but from release. The silence inside the car felt cleaner than it ever had before. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew this much: the years of quiet endurance were over. I turned onto the highway, Denver's skyline glinting ahead like 1,000 small beginnings, unaware that the next storm would break sooner than I expected. The next few nights blurred together. I went through my days on autopilot, answering client emails, finishing a freelance project, pretending that everything inside me hadn't shifted after that diner meeting. The folder with the bank papers stayed on my kitchen table, its edges curling slightly from the dry air. Every time I passed it, I felt the same sharp mix of anger and disbelief. My mother hadn't just borrowed my credit. She'd used my name like a tool, confident I'd never fight back. 3 days later, my phone buzzed again. It was her. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "What did you do, Claire?" she demanded as soon as I answered. The background noise was chaotic music, chatter, something clinking like glass. The bank called. They froze the cards. "The DJ just canceled, and the restaurant won't serve without payment. You have to call them and fix this right now." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. I didn't do anything I said evenly. "The bank found fraud. They're handling it," she gasped, sharp and theatrical. "Fraud. Don't be ridiculous. It's Haley's birthday. You're ruining everything she's looked forward to all year." I let her words hang in the air. "You already did," I said quietly. The line went dead. Outside, the city was alive with weekend noise traffic rolling down Colfax Avenue, faint laughter from the restaurant below. But inside my apartment, it felt like time had stopped. I placed my phone face down on the counter and poured coffee that had gone lukewarm. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted the truth to do its work. An hour later, another call came, an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then picked up. "Ms. Dawson," a calm, professional voice said. "This is Avery Blake, legal representative for Capital One here in Colorado. I wanted to inform you that your identity theft case has been escalated to our internal investigations team. We're coordinating with Denver police to verify transactions made with the fraudulent cards." My chest tightened. "Do you mean they'll contact the people who used them?" Avery confirmed. "Yes, ma'am. We're starting tonight. The largest payments were linked to a Cherry Creek venue currently hosting an event. Officer Porter will be on site to document the transactions." I stared at the mug in my hand, its steam fading into nothing. "Thank you," I managed. "I understand." After hanging up, I sat still, letting the reality sink in. Somewhere across town, Haley's party was in full swing. Lights, music, laughter, the world my mother built on stolen money. I imagined her floating through that crowd, certain she'd gotten away with everything as she had 100 times before. But this time, there would be witnesses. The storm hit, just after 9. A text from Haley flashed across my screen. "Are you insane? The police just showed up." The DJ left. "Everyone's staring at Mom like she's a criminal." Another came seconds later. "You ruined my birthday." I placed the phone down face up this time and watched the messages keep coming until the screen dimmed. Later, I would learn what happened at Cherry Creek. Officer Porter and another officer had entered the hall quietly. No sirens, no shouting, just the steady sound of shoes on marble. The music faltered. The crowd went still. The bank's representative stood beside them, folder in hand. "We're here to verify a fraudulent transaction involving a credit account under the name Claire Dawson Porter," announced. "This isn't an arrest. We just need to speak with the person who made these payments." My mother's smile, the one she used for neighbors and donors, reportedly froze in place. "There must be a mistake," she said. The banker opened his folder, reading evenly. The account was opened at our Littleton branch and signed by Mrs. Marianne Dawson. The whisper that swept through the room was louder than the music had been. Someone started recording a teenager, probably one of Haley's friends. A few flashes went off as people pretended to check their phones but couldn't look away. My mother stammered, "I was helping my daughter. I didn't realize it was against the law." Porter didn't raise his voice. "Ma'am, we just need your statement. You're free to leave once the report is filed." Haley, dressed in silver and mascara, burst into tears. "Why did you do this, Mom? She's always jealous of me," she cried toward the camera that someone forgot to lower. My mother reached for her, but Haley stepped back, humiliated. The officers continued their notes. Within minutes, the music stopped completely. The DJ packed up, the catering staff began clearing half-eaten plates, and the neon sign that read Sweet 16 flickered before going dark. By the time the last guest slipped out, the photo booth was still running, capturing the entire scene in its repeating loop. Haley crying, my mother pleading, the police calmly collecting documents. Later that night, the clip would appear on social media under the caption, When Sweet 16 Turns Sour Police Crash Cherry Creek Party. I didn't watch it until the next morning. It was short 30 seconds, but it said everything. My mother's voice trembling, Haley's mascara streaking, Porter standing in the background professional and composed. I didn't share or comment. I just sat at my kitchen table and watched the clip fade into the soft light of dawn. A few hours later, an email arrived from Capital One. The subject line read, Account freeze and repayment agreement. I opened it slowly, half expecting another blow. But the message was simple. All fraudulent credit lines have been suspended. The primary applicant, Mrs. Marianne Dawson, has agreed to repay $8,400 in unauthorized charges. Attached was a formal notice signed by both the bank and legal counsel. I stared at the line until it blurred. It wasn't victory, it was relief, quiet and heavy. Word spread faster than I imagined. In suburbs like Littleton, secrets moved on the wind. By the end of the weekend, neighbors were whispering in driveways and grocery store aisles. The Dawsons, once the polished family who threw summer cookouts, had become a cautionary tale about borrowed money and bad judgment. Haley's social media accounts went private after the video reached 500,000 views. My father's company issued an internal memo about misuse of company mail for personal matters. A friend who still worked there forwarded me the note, its tone polite but firm. I read it twice and then closed my laptop. I didn't reply to any of their messages that week. I didn't need to. The truth was already doing what it was meant to do. I filled out the forms from the bank, signed the affidavit of identity theft, and sent copies to the credit bureaus. One by one, small confirmations arrived, emails from Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, each line restoring a piece of what they'd taken. That Friday, I went to the police station to sign my official report. Officer Porter met me in the lobby, offering a brief smile. "Ms. Dawson," he said, "I heard everything was resolved." I nodded. "The accounts are frozen. The repayment's been ordered." He studied me for a moment. "Would you like to file a no-contact order? After all this, it might bring you some peace." I thought for a moment, then shook my head. "No, I don't want to live in defense forever. I just want to live." His smile deepened, the kind that came from understanding more than he said. "That's the best thing I've heard all week," he said. As I walked out, the sun broke through the clouds over the station parking lot, scattering light across the wet pavement. The world outside smelled like rain and new asphalt, the kind of scent that hints at a clean start. That night, I opened a blank journal I'd bought months ago and wrote only one sentence. Freedom isn't something someone gives you, it's something you decide to keep. I closed the cover and set it beside the locksmith's receipt on my desk, both reminders of the same lesson. I didn't know what the next months would look like or whether the silence would hold, but for the first time, the quiet in my apartment felt like peace, not punishment. Somewhere in the distance, Denver lights shimmered against the mountains, and for the first time in years, I felt like I finally belonged to myself. Still, as I turned off the lamp and pulled the blanket over my shoulders, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the noise outside faded, when the family that had used my name realized I wasn't coming back to clean up their mess. I didn't know it yet, but the message waiting in my inbox the next morning would give me that answer. The morning after the storm at Cherry Creek, I woke to the sound of light rain tapping against my window. For a few seconds I didn't move, half wondering if everything that had unfolded the night before had only been a long, strange dream. But when I rolled over my phone, lit up emails alerts, and a string of unread messages that pulled the memory back in full color. The top one came from Capital One. The subject line was brief, "Account resolution confirmed." I opened it, and there it was in black and white. All fraudulent credit accounts have been terminated. The primary applicant, Mrs. Marianne Dawson, has agreed to repay $8,400 in unauthorized charges. Below it, a signature from both my mother and the bank's legal counsel. The words didn't feel like victory. They felt like air after too long underwater. By noon, the city was already talking. I didn't have to scroll far to see the video again. The shaky clip from the photo booth that had captured my mother's panicked face and Haley's tears. The caption read, "Police crash Suite 16 over credit card fraud." More than 500,000 views. Neighbors were whispering, friends were sharing, and Littleton, a town that prided itself on tidy lawns and tidy secrets, was buzzing. I scrolled once, then locked my phone and set it face down. There was no satisfaction in it, just quiet disbelief that something I'd lived with in silence for years had become public without me lifting a finger. That afternoon, a text from an unknown number appeared. "Claire, this is Dad. Please answer." I didn't. Another followed. "Your mother is distraught. Haley won't leave her room. We need to talk." I closed the messages and went back to work finishing a client report with the same steady focus I'd used to survive every other storm. Outside my window, the clouds broke, leaving streaks of sunlight on the wet streets below. I decided that was enough for now. 2 days later, a thin envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a letter from Capital One confirming the closure of the accounts and the restitution agreement. A second document stamped by the bank's fraud division listed my name as victim of identity misuse case resolved. I folded the papers carefully, slid them into the same folder that held the locksmith's receipt and my graduation photo, and tucked it into the drawer beside my bed. For the first time, that drawer didn't hold reminders of debt or duty, it held proof of survival. Word of the scandal moved faster than I ever could. By the end of the week, Haley had shut down all her social media accounts after the video was reposted with new captions. My father's company sent him a formal notice about misusing his work address for personal mail. A former coworker forwarded me the memo. I read it once, imagining him sitting in some quiet office listening as someone in a suit recited his reprimand aloud. He had always been the man who kept the peace by staying silent. Now that silence was part of the cost. I didn't reply to any of them. No calls, no messages. It wasn't anger that kept me quiet, just a kind of tiredness that lived too deep for words. I spent my evenings sorting through documents, closing accounts, updating passwords, reclaiming the small corners of my life that had always belonged to someone else. Each time I checked something off the list, the weight in my chest lifted just a little more. That Friday, I took the final set of papers to the Denver Police Department to sign my official statement. Officer Porter was there leaning against the reception counter with a cup of coffee. When he saw me, he nodded, his expression warm but steady. "Ms. Dawson," he said, "looks like everything's wrapped up." I handed him the folder. "The bank recovered the funds. They said repayments already in process." He flipped through the papers, nodding once. "Good. It's rare to see something like this close so cleanly." He looked up after a pause. "Would you like me to file a no-contact order? It might help if they try to reach out again." I considered it. The air outside the station smelled like fresh rain, the kind that makes everything feel washed new. "No," I said finally. "I don't want to live waiting for their next move. I just want to move forward." Porter smiled, small but genuine. "That's a good answer," he said. "I'll note in the report that the matter's closed. You deserve to rest now. Rest." The word lingered. On my way home, I stopped at a small used bookstore I passed every week, but had never entered. A chalkboard by the door read, "Healing takes time, but it starts with a choice." Inside, the air smelled of dust and old paper. I ran my fingers across a shelf until I found a thick, leather-bound journal with blank pages. I bought it and told myself it wasn't for them, it was for me. That evening I brewed a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, the journal open to its first page. I wrote one line. "Freedom isn't about leaving, it's about choosing peace." Then I closed the cover and left it beside the locksmith's receipt on the table, two small symbols of everything I'd reclaimed. The days that followed were quiet, in a way I'd never known before. My apartment felt lighter. Even the hum of the refrigerator, once a lonely sound, seemed steady now. Mrs. Alvarez came by one afternoon with a small pot of jasmine tea and said, "You look different, Nina," like someone who stopped holding her breath. I smiled and poured us each a cup. Maybe I finally did, I said. We sat on the balcony as the evening sun dipped behind the buildings, the scent of her jasmine plant rising between us. Later that night, as I tidied the apartment, my phone buzzed again. It was an email from Officer Porter. Case officially closed. No prosecution, but the record is filed. You can rest easy now. I read it twice, then typed back, "Thank you. I'm learning how to do that." When I set the phone down, the apartment was quiet, except for the faint wind pushing through the window screen. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the two framed items on the wall, my diploma and the locksmith's receipt. Different worlds, but both proof of what I'd built on my own. For the first time in years, I felt no pull to prove anything to anyone. The next morning, I opened my window to let the cool Denver air fill the room. The city buzzed, as it always did, buses groaning down Colfax, early commuters rushing past. But inside there was stillness, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I made coffee, watered the small fern Mrs. Alvarez had given me, and wrote another line in my journal. Today, I owe no one, not my name, not my peace. As the sun climbed higher, a single email notification popped up on my laptop. The sender's name froze me for a moment. Marianne Dawson, request for discussion. I didn't open it. I dragged it into the archive without reading a word. There was nothing left to say. I closed the laptop, took my mug to the window, and looked out at the city. The streets glistened from the rain, catching the light like small rivers. For the first time, I understood what freedom really sounded like. It wasn't applause or forgiveness. It was the sound of quiet after chaos, the kind of silence that finally feels safe. What I didn't know then was that 6 months later, the quiet would turn into something new. A promotion, a small circle of friends, and a message that would open a door I thought I'd closed forever. But that was still ahead of me, waiting just beyond the skyline. 6 months passed quietly. Denver's summer melted into early fall, and I learned to measure time not by what had been taken from me, but by the things I built myself. My days filled with steady routines, morning runs by Cheeseman Park, afternoons buried in spreadsheets at Nova Data Labs, evenings spent cooking in the little kitchen that once felt too empty. The space that used to echo with silence now held the faint hum of life returning. One Thursday afternoon, as I was finalizing a quarterly report, Naomi Ellis from HR stopped by my desk. She was in her 50s, calm-eyed, the kind of woman who made every conversation feel measured and sincere. "Claire," she said, "do you have a minute?" I nodded, saving my work and following her into her glass-walled office. She closed the door gently behind us. "You've done excellent work these past few months," she began. "Your projects have streamlined 3 major contracts. The analytics team keeps mentioning your leadership." I felt my pulse quicken. "Thank you," I said softly. Naomi smiled, folding her hands. "We're promoting you to senior analyst effective next week. It comes with a pay raise and equity. You've earned it." The words hit like a slow warmth spreading through my chest. For so long, I'd worked quietly in the shadows, doing everything right, never asking for recognition. Hearing someone say you've earned it made the months of rebuilding feel worth it. That night, I treated myself to dinner at a small Italian place near Capitol Hill. I brought the journal I'd been keeping and opened it to a new page. The ink glided easily as I wrote, "Success feels different when it's built from peace, not pressure." I closed the book, letting the sentence settle. The next week was a blur of new meetings, congratulations, and small changes that carried more weight than I expected. My name on the new office door, the salary notice in my inbox, the first company email I sent that ended with Claire Dawson, senior analyst. But beneath all the busyness, there was something else. A quiet balance I'd fought hard to create. It was a Saturday morning when the past found a way to knock again. My phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. The sender's name froze me for a moment. Douglas Dawson. The message was brief. "Your mother's not well. She wants to see you. Please call when you can." I stared at it, my hands stilling over a half-folded towel. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air thicker. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I set the phone down and went for a walk. The trees along the sidewalk had begun turning gold, their leaves brushing the pavement like quiet reminders that everything changes, whether you're ready or not. When I came back, I picked up the phone and called. My father answered after one ring. His voice was low, weary. "Claire," he said, "your mother's been having panic attacks. The doctor says it's stress. She keeps saying she needs to talk to you." I hesitated. "What would talking change?" I asked. There was a long pause. Maybe nothing, he admitted, but she's not sleeping, and I think she finally understands what she's done. I didn't know whether to believe him. Yet something in his voice, something I hadn't heard since I was a child, sounded like honesty. "I'll think about it," I said, and ended the call. That night I couldn't shake the conversation. I opened my old laptop, the one I'd kept as evidence during the fraud investigation. Its screen was cracked in one corner, but it still worked. I scrolled through the old files, the recordings, the emails, the documents that had once defined my every waking moment. Then I closed them all and shut the lid. I wasn't that person anymore. The following morning I drove to Littleton. It had been almost a year since I'd seen that house. The drive felt both familiar and foreign, same turns, same traffic lights, but the weight behind them was gone. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed the front yard was unkempt, the rose bushes bare. My father opened the door before I even knocked. His hair had gone grayer, his eyes heavier. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. Inside, the house smelled faintly of lavender and lemon cleaner, but underneath was something sadder, like air that hadn't been aired out in months. My mother was sitting on the couch, thinner than I remembered, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When she looked up, the usual sharpness in her eyes was gone. "Claire," she said softly, "you look healthy." I nodded, but didn't sit right away. "Dad said you wanted to talk." She took a shaky breath. "I owe you an apology," she began, "for everything, for the money, for calling the police, for making you feel like you had to disappear to be free." Her voice trembled on the last word. "I thought I was protecting us. I didn't realize I was destroying what little family we had left." The words hung there, thin and unsure. I watched her, the woman who had once seemed unshakable, now small and humbled. "I can't forget it," I said finally. "But I'm glad you said it." She nodded, tears slipping down her face. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying to do better. I started therapy last month. The doctor said it's a start." For the first time in years, her words didn't sound like manipulation. They sounded like effort. My father stood quietly behind her, his hand resting on her shoulder. I looked at both of them and said, "The only thing I need is honesty. If this is real, prove it by how you live, not what you say." We talked for a while longer, mostly about ordinary things, how work was going, how the neighbors had moved away, how Haley had started a part-time job at a cafe downtown. The conversation was cautious, but calm, like stepping onto ice that might finally hold. When I left, my mother followed me to the door. "Claire," she said softly, "thank you for coming. I didn't think you would." I turned toward her. "Neither did I said, and stepped into the sunlight. Driving back to Denver, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not forgiveness exactly, but the sense that the past was losing its power over me. The skyline came into view, the mountains behind it hazy and gold in the late afternoon light. At home, I opened my journal again. On a blank page, I wrote, "Some doors close quietly, but they stay closed for the right reasons." I closed the book and set it beside the window. The evening light fell across it, soft and forgiving. Later that night, as I washed dishes, a new message came through on my phone. This time it wasn't from my parents. It was from Naomi Ellis. "Claire, would you be open to mentoring a new hire? She's young, reminds me of you when you first started. I think you could make a real difference." I smiled and typed back, "Yes, I'd like that." It wasn't until weeks later, when I met the new hire, bright, nervous, eager, that I realized what that message had really meant. Life wasn't circling back to where it had been. It was expanding, making room for something better. And even though I didn't know it then, that simple yes would mark the beginning of something far bigger than I could imagine, a moment that would quietly turn into the future I'd been waiting to build. By winter, the rhythm of my life had changed completely. The quiet routines that once filled my evenings were replaced with mentorship sessions, team meetings, and long walks home through the soft glow of Denver's streetlights. I'd agreed to mentor Maya Bennett, a new hire barely out of college, bright, determined, still trying to find her footing. She reminded me so much of myself when I first started, cautious but hungry, to prove she belonged. Our first meeting was in the break room on a snowy Monday morning. She stood nervously by the coffee machine, clutching a notebook like it was a shield. "You're Claire, right?" she asked, her voice almost apologetic. I smiled and gestured to the table near the window. "That's me. Sit down. You don't need to be nervous." She laughed a little, the tension in her shoulders easing. Over the next hour, we talked about everything from project management to office culture to the best taco truck near the office. By the end of that week, she was already leading her first presentation. Watching her steady herself at the podium brought back memories of the first time I'd done the same, heart-pounding, palms damp, hoping my voice wouldn't betray me. Afterward, when the team applauded her for a job well done, I caught her eye across the conference table and gave a small nod. She smiled back, and something in that moment settled inside me. It felt like the quiet beginning of a new chapter. As weeks turned into months, I found myself spending more time at work than at home, not out of obligation, but because the office no longer felt like a place I had to prove myself. It felt like a place I belonged. Naomi often dropped by my desk with small updates or coffee, sometimes just to ask how things were going. "You've got good instincts with people," she told me one afternoon. "You lead without needing to control. That's rare." I thanked her, thinking how strange it felt to hear words of affirmation that didn't come with conditions attached. Outside of work, my life began to expand in quiet, steady ways. I reconnected with Dr. Moore, my old thesis advisor, who invited me to speak at a university panel about women in data science. At first, I hesitated. Public speaking wasn't my strength. But when I stood in front of that classroom and saw a dozen young women looking at me with the same uncertainty I once carried, the words came easily. I told them about persistence, about building from nothing, about protecting your own name. When it ended, a student came up and said, "You made me feel like I can actually do this." That single sentence stayed with me for days. It was late February when something unexpected arrived at my office, a letter handwritten and mailed to Nova's address. I recognized the looping script immediately. My mother's. I sat there for a long time, the envelope cold in my hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No dramatics, no manipulation. Just a few sentences written in the neat, careful handwriting I'd grown up seeing on birthday cards and school forms. "Claire, your father and I are selling the house this spring. We're starting over somewhere quieter. I don't expect you to reply. I just wanted you to know that we're trying to make things right. Haley got into community college. She's working part-time and says she wants to be independent like you. We're proud of her for that. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Mom." I read it twice, then folded it carefully back into the envelope. There was no apology this time, but there was something else, humility maybe, or acceptance. I tucked it into the same drawer that held my locksmith's receipt, my diploma, and my old journal. For once, it didn't sting to read her words. That weekend, I met Tessa for coffee. It had been months since we'd seen each other in person. She slid into the booth with a grin, snow still melting from her hair. "You've got that glow," she said. "Promotion looks good on you." I laughed, stirring sugar into my coffee. "It's not the promotion," I said. "It's peace." She nodded knowingly. "Same thing, isn't it?" As we talked, I realized how much of my life had shifted since the year began. The anxiety that once lived under my skin had been replaced by something quieter, a sense of steadiness I'd never known before. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. I was finally living on my own terms. That spring, Maya's project went live, a major data model that she'd built almost single-handedly. Naomi called a small team meeting to celebrate. "You've all done incredible work," she said, raising her cup of coffee like a toast. "But this one deserves a special mention." She turned toward Maya, who flushed bright red. "And a thank you to Claire for her guidance. It's rare to see mentorship turn into such a success story so quickly." Everyone clapped, and I smiled across the table at Maya, who mouthed a quiet thank you. Later that evening, after the office had emptied, I stayed behind to finish a report. The sunset spilled through the windows, washing everything in gold. The quiet hum of computers and the faint ticking of the clock filled the space. I thought about how much had changed, how the girl who once sat alone at her graduation now stood here surrounded by respect she'd earned, not borrowed. When I finally shut down my computer and gathered my things, I caught my reflection in the glass. The same face but steadier now. The same eyes but no longer waiting for permission to see the world differently. Outside, the streets were busy with the first signs of spring, couples walking dogs, buses sighing at the corners, the smell of rain somewhere in the distance. I walked slowly, letting the air brush against my face, the city lights flickering on one by one. As I turned the corner toward my apartment, my phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line read, "Nomination Denver Young Leaders in Tech." I opened it and stared at the message. Naomi had submitted my name for an industry award. The ceremony was in May. She'd written Claire Dawson's resilience and integrity exemplify what leadership should look like in technology. I stopped on the sidewalk, watching the glow of the screen fade against the night. It wasn't about recognition anymore, it was about what it meant. Every hard decision, every painful boundary, every quiet night spent wondering if I'd done the right thing, it had led here. I looked up at the stars barely visible above the city and whispered to no one in particular, "Thank you." Back inside my apartment, I lit the small candle on my windowsill and opened my journal one more time. I wrote, "Peace has a sound. It's the quiet between what hurt and what healed." When I set down the pen, the city lights outside shimmered like reflections in glass. I didn't know it yet, but that award ceremony would bring one last unexpected encounter, one that would close the circle completely. The ceremony took place in early May, inside a glass-walled ballroom overlooking downtown Denver. Sunlight spilled across rows of white chairs and name tags glinting off silver trays and polished microphones. I hadn't expected to feel nervous, but as I looked out over the sea of unfamiliar faces, my palms began to warm. Naomi stood beside me, adjusting her glasses, calm as ever. "You'll do fine," she said quietly. "Just speak from the truth." When my name was called, the applause felt soft and genuine. No fanfare, no spotlight, theatrics, just people recognizing something earned. I stepped up to the podium, the city skyline shining behind me like a quiet witness. The presenter read from a card, "For leadership built on integrity, resilience, and grace, Claire Dawson." The words echoed for a moment, and I let them settle. I spoke briefly, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. I thanked my team, Naomi, and the mentors who'd taught me the value of small, consistent work. Then I said something I hadn't planned. Sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. Sometimes it's the peace you build after the storm ends. The room was silent for a heartbeat before the applause began again, gentle understanding. Afterward, as people mingled near the buffet tables, a familiar voice said my name. I turned and saw Haley standing a few feet away, older now, her hair shorter, her posture uncertain. "Hi," she said softly. "You look different. Good different." I smiled, unsure what to say. She hesitated before adding, "Mom saw the announcement online. She wanted to come but thought it might ruin things for you." I nodded. "How is she?" "She's better," Haley said. "They moved to Fort Collins. She still goes to therapy. Dad works at a small hardware store now. It's quieter, I think." She paused, twisting a ring on her finger. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything, for how I treated you. I didn't understand what you were carrying back then." Her voice cracked a little at the end. I didn't rush to fill the silence. We just stood there, two people who had once shared everything but trust. Finally, I said, "It takes time to see things clearly. I'm glad you do now." She smiled, eyes glistening. "You turned out stronger than all of us," she whispered. Before she left, she handed me a small envelope. "Mom wanted you to have this," she said, and then she was gone, disappearing into the crowd as quietly as she'd come. Later that night, back in my apartment, I opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of the four of us from years ago, taken before things broke. On the back, my mother had written in the same careful handwriting I'd once found on birthday cards, "We're proud of you even from a distance." I placed the photo inside my journal, between the pages where I'd written about peace. It didn't feel like a reopening of old wounds. It felt like closure, quiet and complete. The next morning, I met Naomi and Maya for coffee. The three of us sat on the cafe patio laughing about work deadlines and summer plans. Maya was glowing from her own success, recently promoted, already mentoring another new hire. I watched her speak with confidence and thought how full circle it all felt. Naomi caught my eye and said, "You know, Claire, this," she motioned around the table, "is what real leadership looks like." I smiled, sipping my coffee as sunlight filtered through the awning. When I went home that afternoon, I opened the window and let the spring air fill the room. The skyline shimmered in the distance, and somewhere the faint sound of church bells carried through the air. I sat at my desk, picked up my pen, and turned to the last page of my journal. I wrote, "Peace doesn't erase the past, it redeems it. Every boundary, every loss, every hard choice becomes a seed for something stronger." I paused, looking out at the mountains painted faintly against the sky. In the end, it wasn't about being seen, it was about being free. I closed the book and placed it beside the photo, letting the afternoon light rest on both. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the quiet, the kind that didn't feel empty anymore, but earned. And if you're listening right now, maybe you've had to rebuild something of your own. Maybe you've learned that justice doesn't always roar it, sometimes whispers in the calm that follows courage. Take a moment to breathe that in. And if this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs to remember that peace is possible even after everything.